I'm Liam Kelly from the Institute of Asian Studies at University Brunei Darussalam, and I'm very happy today to be talking with Professor Jérôme Samuel from INALCO in Paris, who's just paid us a visit and who has just given a talk on one of his research projects, an ongoing research project on the intelligibility of Malaysian and Indonesian languages. That was a fascinating talk, very rich in detail and something very difficult to summarize. That was a fascinating talk, very rich in detail and something very difficult to summarize in a short video, but perhaps for people who are not familiar with this research project, you could explain to us a little bit about what you're doing and what you find to be your important findings.
Yeah, so I'm researching on the language and the common languages used in this very vast area, speaking Malay countries, four countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei. And what I'm interested in now is the degree of mutual intelligibility between two standards, Indonesian standard and the Malay or Malaysian standard, which are approximately the same.
Right.
So I'm trying to, I tried this afternoon to explain the background. I mean the demo-linguistic background, the political background, the historical background, in order to better understand why and how far are these languages are shared or considered as common or not. Both have retained national names. So in Malaysia, people say Malaysian language, Bahasa Malaysia, or Malay language, Bahasa Melayu, which are not exactly the same. One refers to one community only, the other one refers to all the community of Malaysia. Whereas here in Brunei, Bahasa Melayu is used and Bahasa Malaysia not, of course. Bahasa Brunei is something else.
Right.
In Indonesia, people use Bahasa Indonesia, Indonesian language, since the mid-1920s. And it has strong meaning and strong implication related to history, independence, politics. In Indonesia, the Indonesian language is not challenged by any other language. Instead of Malaysia, in Malaysia, English, of course, as a common language, is concurrencing the Malay or Malaysian language.
And then there's a really interesting point you brought up, was the one about race, I found as well, where there's not, because of the historical legacy, you were saying in Indonesia you don't have this concept of race that then gets attached to language. Is that correct?
Yes, you're correct. The Dutch, they made differences between the local people, natives, and other Asians, as they said at that time, and Europeans, of course. But those broad categories were not defined in the same way as in the peninsula or in the British-ruled countries. So the Dutch, first they said that the native. Natives are all local people. All the Asians, according the term used at that time, refers to people coming from China, people coming from the Middle East, and sometimes people coming from South Asia. Most of them are coming from south part of China. European refers to Westerners and Japanese. The Japanese got the same status as the Westerners, and the Ottoman subject coming from the European part of the Ottoman Empire. You know?
Right.
Finally, after the independence, there was no reason to make any difference between the other Asian and the natives. So all became Indonesian. Although there was a slightly different treatment for the Chinese, not for the Arabs, because the Arabs were completely involved in the struggle for independence, which was not clearly the case for Chinese, maybe because some of the Chinese are still interested at that time with Chinese affairs.
Right.
And the fate of China at that time.
Right.
But finally, most of them became Indonesian citizens, as well as other Indonesian citizens. With some differentiation, sometimes when happens difficulties in Indonesia, of course, Chinese, Indonesian, they do suffer from it. But anyway, there are no legal or official communities based on race.
Right.
Which happens, it exists here in Brunei, in Singapore, in Malaysia, and you have different races. The definition of each race differs a little bit between all countries. It's broader here in Brunei, narrower in Malaysia, but they have basically Malay race, the Chinese race, European race, and Indian in Singapore and in Malaysia. The problem is that in Malaysia, the Malay community got the power and doesn't want to share it with the other. So they've built an ideology of power and of the ruling the country based on or made to the advantage of a single community, but they have to accommodate it sometimes.
And language is connected to this.
And the language, of course, is connected with it, because the national language in Malaysia is Malay, which sometimes is called Melayu. Melayu only refers to the Malay community, and sometimes it has been called Malaysian language, Bahasa Malaysia, which refers to the whole country. But not all Malay agree to call it either Bahasa Melayu or Bahasa Malaysia, and not all the members of the community agree to any of these two terms, two names.
Right.
So it's a very difficult matter. And finally, the real common language in Malaysia is English.
Right. Yeah. Right. But with Malay, I mean, you said people don't agree on it in Malaysia. That you also talked about how people in Indonesia and Malaysia and Singapore in, say, the 70s and 80s couldn't really agree on creating a unified form of the language. But now today you have just this more organic communication that's taking place with YouTube, with TV. And so maybe you could explain a little bit about what has been happening.
This is something, as another point. So, as you said, since the mid-60s, Indonesian and Malaysian, mostly. So at that time, Brunei was not yet fully independent, and the Singaporeans were not really interested in it. So they tried to more unify, well, not really unify, but make the both standard closer. They did it for the spelling. They tried to do it for this terminology. My opinion and my conviction is that they failed, and I tried to prove it in my dissertation about 15 years ago.
Okay.
Now, and they failed for several reasons, because of the settings of each country are different, and because it's of a supreme importance for both countries to retain their own national language in its own national form in order to preserve their national identity.
Sure.
It's more important for the Malaysian than for the Indonesian, actually. Anyway, time has passed, and now we see, as you say, that the communication, the tools and the products have literally exploded within the last 20 or 25 years. And now you can access virtually any product, anything from anywhere in the world. Do Indonesian and Malaysian really share the same products? I'm not sure.
I see.
I'm not sure. But maybe, but it has to be investigated more deeply.
Okay.
So by interviewing teenagers, youngsters. Do you have friends on the internet? Where are they coming from?
I see.
Things like this.
Okay.
But it's easier to investigate and to try to understand the circulation of the languages and of the products through, for instance, the audiovisual product. That was the main part of my talk today. So TV programs produced in Indonesia, broadcasted in Malaysia, and conventionally broadcasted in Indonesia from Malaysia. And in this case, we can see that, well, both languages are not really shared. First, because there are not only two languages, but are actually three. Standard Indonesian, Standard Malaysian, and Jakartanese, which is a dialect of Indonesian. It's the substandard dialect or register of Indonesian, which is now very widely nationally used in Indonesia. And why? Because most of the TV programs or TV series, soap operas produced in Indonesia do use dialects in Jakartanese, not in Standard Indonesian. Standard Indonesian is not used daily. It's written, it's spoken too, but not for the daily use, not for the common use. Maybe it resembles a little bit with difference between Standard Malay here and Bruneian language. Standard, people don't know the standard for the daily communication. So the people need to translate in a way, and they do it by using subtitling for both parts, for different reasons. Censorship in Malaysia, and because dubbing was banned 20 years ago in Indonesia for political reasons.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, and it's in examining the subtitles that you really get into the heart of your kind of ideas about
the analysis of the subtitles is interesting because we can see different strategies of translation. Sometimes the translator only adjusts the language. So the words are the same, sometimes it's the same, but part of the lexicon differs slightly, very slightly. Maybe it is done to help the audience in understanding visually what they can hear. And I think it's really important because intonation, speed are not the same in both languages. So even if the words are the same, you may have difficulties to understand Indonesian from the Malaysian point of view. And the same for the other audience. The intonation and the pronunciation of Malaysian especially is a problem for the Indonesians. It's a problem. They love it. I mean, for them it's funny. Really funny. Really funny. They laugh with it, but they really like it. For the Malaysian, it's a little bit different. First, because there is the problem with Jakartanese, and because the speed. The people on TV programs in Indonesia, they do really speak very quick.
Oh, really? Okay.
Much more quicker than in the daily life.
Interesting. Okay. So, like I said, this was a fascinating talk, and obviously, this is something that will keep you very busy, interviewing teenagers, examining audiovisual materials. But this is only one of the things that you're researching. Is that correct? And perhaps you could let us, share a little bit about the other interests that you have.
Yeah, there are three main fields of interest for me. The first one is this one. It's sociolinguistics. So formally, I began with language policy. For years, I've been working in language policy in Indonesia. And for my PhD, it was at the core, the main part of my PhD, language policy for terminology. But now I'm shifting to the real uses, and that's why I'm interested in the research I've presented this afternoon during the talk. This is the first one. The second one is linked to didactics of Indonesian, because I do teach the language.
I see.
And I'm interested in several issues related to the teaching of Indonesian. Which standard or which register should we choose to be taught to the students? What are the tools we should use? What are the difficulties faced by the by the teacher and by the students, and because I'm teaching grammar, Indonesian grammar, which concept could be used to teach at best the Indonesian grammar, which mainly don't need the, not most, but a lot of linguistic concepts or categories used for the description of European languages cannot apply for Indonesian and Malay, generally speaking. So the second one, and the third one is completely different. Absolutely not related with the language. Since 10 years ago, I'm interested in popular art in Java, and more specifically in the Javanese painting on glass, reverse glass painting, which is not very well known, and you maybe never seen such paintings. So I began 10 years ago, or maybe more, to collect through collectioners, through antique dealers, as much as painting as what I'm able to photograph, actually, to take pictures. And now I have a database more than maybe 200 or 200, 3,000 pictures, different paintings.
Really?
And I have big corpus, not yet finished, of course. And well, I try to analyze not the corpus as a whole, but part of the corpus according to the themes, to the topics, and I'm trying to understand from a specific point of view of history or art history, to understand the background of the painters, the condition of production of the paintings, and development of the painting, the history of this art, and the use of that of glass as a support for painting in Java.
I think
it's completely different.
But you definitely need to come back to the Institute of Asian Studies again to give another seminar to talk about that, because I think we would love to hear about that topic, and that's something we can talk about in much more detail next time. So thank you very much for sitting down and sharing some information about your talk and about your research, and thank you for visiting the Institute of Asian Studies.
Thank you, and I hope we'll meet another time together here in Brunei.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay.